They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned at 72 years old that greed is thicker than both. My name is Margaret, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. Before I begin, I need you to do me a favor, comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to share isn't just my story. It's a warning that could happen to any parent, anywhere in this world. 3 months ago, I was sitting in my modest kitchen in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, stirring my morning coffee and watching the steam curl up from my favorite ceramic mug, the one my granddaughter Emma painted for me when she was 8. The morning light filtered through the gingham curtains I'd sewn myself 40 years ago, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. I had no idea that in exactly 4 hours and 37 minutes, my entire life would shatter into pieces so small I'd spend weeks trying to put them back together. If you've ever been a parent, hit that subscribe button right now, because you need to hear what comes next. And if you haven't, well, maybe this story will teach you something about the kind of parent you want to be. I was 72, living on a fixed income that stretched just enough to cover my small mortgage, utilities, and groceries. My husband Robert had been gone for 8 years. Cancer took him slow and painful, the way it seems to take all the good ones. But I wasn't bitter. I had my son David, his wife Christina, and my precious granddaughter Emma. That's all I needed, or so I thought. David was 34, a decent man who worked construction when the jobs were available. Christina, 29, was, well, let's just say she had opinions about money that didn't always align with reality. They lived paycheck to paycheck in a rental house about 15 minutes from mine, and Emma, my bright-eyed 10-year-old granddaughter, was the light of all our lives. Every Sunday, they'd come over for dinner. I'd make David's favorite pot roast. Christina would complain about something, the seasoning, the temperature, the fact that I used regular potatoes instead of organic ones, but Emma would help me in the kitchen, her little hands carefully mashing the potatoes while she told me about school, her friends, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Grandma Margaret, she'd say, flour somehow always managing to dust her nose, when I'm a vet, I'm gonna take care of all the animals that nobody else wants. That Sunday 3 months ago started like any other. David arrived first, looking tired but smiling, carrying a bouquet of daisies from the grocery store. Christina came in behind him, already on her phone, scrolling through something that seemed more important than greeting the woman who'd raised the man she married. Emma burst through my front door like sunshine incarnate, practically vibrating with excitement. Grandma! Grandma! Guess what happened at school? But before she could tell me, Christina's voice cut through the air like a blade. Emma, don't get your grandmother all worked up. She's old, and old people need their rest. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I smiled anyway. I'd learned to pick my battles with Christina over the years. David shot his wife a look that could have frozen fire, but she was already back to her phone. During dinner, David seemed different. Distracted. He kept checking his pocket, and there was an energy about him I couldn't quite place. When I asked if everything was all right, he just smiled and said work had been particularly good lately, they'd gotten a big contract, and he was hoping for a bonus. That's wonderful, honey, I said, refilling his glass with sweet tea. You work so hard. You deserve every good thing that comes your way. Christina looked up from her phone for the first time all evening. We deserve it, she corrected, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. David's success is our success. Something cold slithered down my spine, but I couldn't put my finger on why. After dessert, my famous apple pie that Robert always said could make angels weep, David walked me to the kitchen while Christina helped Emma with homework at the dining room table. Mom, he said, his voice low and careful, I need to ask you something. I turned from the sink where I was washing dishes, soap bubbles clinging to my hands. What is it, sweetheart? He pulled a crumpled lottery ticket from his pocket. The paper was worn, like he'd been handling it all day. Would you mind if I used your name for something? It's just. Christina has some credit issues, and my name's tied up with the construction company paperwork. If this ever amounts to anything, it would be easier if it was in a clean name. I looked at the ticket in his hand. Numbers meant nothing to me. I'd never played the lottery in my life. Robert always said it was a tax on people who couldn't do math. What kind of something? I asked, though I was already reaching for the dish towel to dry my hands. It's probably nothing, David said quickly. Just a lottery ticket Christina picked up at the gas station. She has this system, birthdays and anniversaries and stuff. It never wins anything, but she enjoys it. The way he said it, so casual, so dismissive, made me relax. If it was just one of Christina's silly games, what harm could it do? Of course, honey, I said, touching his cheek the way I had when he was small and needed comfort. Whatever you need. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, some kind of legal form I didn't bother reading carefully. Something about lottery winnings and beneficiaries. I signed it without a second thought, the way you sign for a package or agree to terms of service you'll never read. Thanks, Mom, David said, folding the paper carefully and slipping it back into his pocket along with the ticket. You're the best. 20 minutes later, they were gone. Emma had hugged me goodbye, whispering that she'd had the best time and couldn't wait to see me next Sunday. Christina had barely looked up from her phone. And David had kissed my cheek and promised to call later in the week. I cleaned up the dishes, put away the leftovers, and settled into my recliner with a cup of chamomile tea to watch my Sunday night programs. The house felt quiet and peaceful, the way it always did after they left. I had no idea that I'd just signed away my future. 3 days later, David called me at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was standing at the kitchen counter, measuring coffee grounds for my morning pot, when the phone rang. The digital clock on the microwave glowed green in the dim kitchen light. Mom! His voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Mom, you're not going to believe this. David? What's wrong? Is Emma okay? Is Christina? We won, he shouted. Mom, we won. The lottery. $52 million. The coffee grounds scattered across the counter as my hand went limp. $52 million. The number was so large it didn't seem real. It was like someone telling you they discovered a new planet or invented time travel. We won $52 million, David repeated, his voice breaking with emotion. Mom, our lives just changed forever. I sank into the nearest kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Are you sure? Are you absolutely certain? I'm holding the winning numbers right here, he said. Christina checked them 50 times. We called the lottery office. Mom, this is real. This is actually happening. For a moment, the only sound was my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then a thought occurred to me, warm and comforting like a hug from the inside out. Oh, honey, I said, tears starting to gather in my eyes. This means Emma can go to any college she wants. This means you can buy that house Christina's always talking about. This means... Mom, David's voice suddenly changed. The excitement was still there, but something else had crept in. Something that made my stomach clench. We need to talk. Can Christina and I come over? I looked around my small kitchen, at the coffee grounds scattered across the counter, at the morning light just beginning to creep through the windows. Something felt different already, like the air itself had changed. Of course, I said. Come over whenever you want. We'll be there in an hour, David said, and hung up before I could say goodbye. I spent that hour in a strange, dreamlike state. I cleaned up the coffee grounds. I made a fresh pot. I put on my good dress, the navy one with the small flowers that Robert always said made my eyes look brighter. I even applied a little lipstick, something I rarely did anymore except for church or special occasions. This was a special occasion, wasn't it? My family had just won $52 million. $52 million. Even thinking the number felt surreal. I kept imagining all the things this money could mean. David could quit that backbreaking construction work. Christina could go back to school like she always talked about. Emma could have piano lessons, dance lessons, art supplies, a college fund that would make her future bright and limitless. Maybe we could all take a vacation together. I'd never been anywhere exotic. Robert and I had always talked about going to Ireland, tracing back his family roots, but there was never enough money and then there wasn't enough time. When they arrived, I was ready with coffee and the Danish pastries David loved from the bakery downtown. I'd even set out the good china, the set my mother had given me when I married Robert. David walked in first, and something about his posture made me pause. He wasn't walking like a man who'd just won the lottery. He was walking like a man going to a funeral. Christina followed, and she wasn't on her phone for once. She was looking around my house like she was seeing it for the first time, or maybe for the last time. Sit, sit, I said, bustling around them like a mother hen. I made coffee, and I got those Danish pastries you love, David. We need to celebrate. $52 million. I still can't believe it. David sat heavily in the chair that used to be his father's favorite. Christina perched on the edge of the sofa like she was ready to bolt. Mom, David said, not touching the coffee I'd poured him. We need to talk about some things. The happiness that had been bubbling up inside me for the past hour suddenly felt fragile, like a soap bubble about to pop. What kind of things? I asked, settling into my own chair with my coffee cup clutched between my hands like a shield. Christina spoke for the first time since arriving. We've been thinking about our future, she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. About what this money means and how we want to live our lives. That's wonderful, I said, though something in her tone made the words taste like ash. I've been thinking about the same thing. Emma's education, and David, you could finally. Mom, David interrupted, and the way he said it made me stop breathing. Christina and I have decided that we need a fresh start. We're going to move to California. Buy a house there. Start over. I blinked, processing this information. California? But Emma's school is here. Her friends. And I'm here. Christina and David exchanged a look that lasted exactly 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds, I saw my entire future crumble. That's the thing, Mom, David said, and his voice was gentle, which somehow made what came next even worse. We think it's time you made some changes too. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot, and in that moment, I knew that whatever came next would change everything forever. The coffee spread across my floor like spilled blood, seeping into the cracks between the hardwood boards that Robert had installed with his own hands 30 years ago. I stared at the mess, my mind struggling to process what David had just said. Changes. What kind of changes? Let me get a towel, I started to say, but Christina's voice stopped me cold. Don't worry about that right now, Margaret. The way she said my name, not Mom, like she'd called me for the past 11 years, made something inside my chest twist painfully. We need to have this conversation. I looked between my son and his wife, searching their faces for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, that they were about to laugh and tell me they were joking. But David wouldn't meet my eyes, and Christina was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was cold. Calculating. Like she was looking at a problem that needed solving. What kind of conversation? I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. David finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes broke something inside me that I'm not sure ever properly healed. It was guilt, yes, but underneath that was something worse. Resignation. Like he'd already made a decision and was just going through the motions of telling me about it. Mom, you're getting older, he said, his voice so gentle it felt like being stabbed with a silk knife. This house is too big for you. The upkeep, the mortgage payments, the utilities, it's too much for someone on a fixed income. I felt like I was underwater, trying to breathe, trying to understand. I manage just fine, I said. I've never missed a payment. Never asked you for help. But that's just it, Christina said, leaning forward with what I suppose she thought was a caring expression. You're struggling. We can see it. The way you buy generic groceries, how you turn the heat down in winter, those clothes you've been wearing for years. My hand instinctively went to the fabric of my dress, the navy one with flowers that Robert loved. I'd worn it to church, to Emma's school plays, to every important moment in my life for the past 8 years. It was perfectly good. It fit well. It had memories sewn into every thread. There's nothing wrong with being careful with money, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. David shifted in his chair, and I could hear it creaking, the same sound it had made when his father sat there every evening after work, reading the paper and telling me about his day. Mom, what we're trying to say is. David paused, swallowed hard, and for a moment I thought he might change his mind about whatever he was going to say. But then Christina put her hand on his arm, and his resolve seemed to strengthen. We think you'd be happier in a retirement home. Somewhere with people your own age, where you don't have to worry about maintenance or cooking or cleaning. The words hit me like a physical blow. Retirement home. The euphemism for, we don't want you anymore. I don't want to live in a retirement home, I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. This is my home. Robert and I bought this house when you were 2 years old. I painted your bedroom walls. I measured your height on the kitchen doorframe every birthday. I buried my husband's ashes in the rose garden out back. Christina made a soft clucking sound with her tongue, like she was dealing with a difficult child. Margaret, you're being emotional. We're trying to think about what's best for everyone here. Everyone. Like I wasn't part of everyone. Like I was separate from the equation entirely. What about Emma? I asked desperately. She loves coming here on Sundays. This is her grandmother's house. Where will she go for Sunday dinners? The look that passed between David and Christina lasted exactly 2 heartbeats, but in those 2 heartbeats, I saw the rest of my life stretch out before me like a barren wasteland. Mom, David said, and now his voice was taking on an edge of impatience. Emma's going to have a very different life now. Private schools, tutors, activities. She's going to be busy. Too busy for her grandmother. The words hung in the air unspoken, but they might as well have been written in blood across my living room wall. I stood up suddenly, my legs shaky but determined. No, I said. Absolutely not. This is my house. I'm not going anywhere. Christina laughed. Actually laughed. A short, sharp sound like breaking glass. Margaret, she said, standing up as well, I don't think you understand the situation here. What situation? I demanded. My son just won $52 million, and instead of celebrating, you're trying to ship me off to die somewhere convenient? Nobody's talking about dying, David said quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. Christina walked over to the window, looking out at my small front yard with its carefully tended flower beds and the oak tree Robert and I had planted to celebrate David's graduation from high school. The thing is, she said, her back still to me, we've already been looking at properties in California. Gated communities. Places where the neighbors respect privacy. Places where. She turned around, and her smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. Places where the kind of people we're going to be associating with won't have to worry about complications. Complications. That's what I was. A complication. I'm your family, I said to David, my voice breaking. I'm Emma's grandmother. I changed your diapers, I sang you to sleep, I sat up with you when you had pneumonia when you were 7 years old. I held you when your father died. How am I a complication? David's face crumpled for just a moment, and I hoped, that he was remembering. Remembering all of it. The bedtime stories, the scraped knees I kissed better, the way he used to crawl into bed with Robert and me during thunderstorms. But then Christina walked over and put her hand on his shoulder, and whatever moment of weakness he'd been having passed like a shadow. Mom, we're not abandoning you, he said, but the words sounded rehearsed. We're going to make sure you're taken care of. We've already researched some really nice places. Sunset Manor has a great reputation, and it's only 40 minutes from here. You could have friends, activities, regular meals. I don't want friends from a retirement home. I screamed, and the sound of my own voice shocked me. I hadn't raised my voice like that since David was a teenager. I want my family. I want my granddaughter. I want Sunday dinners and helping with homework and being part of your lives. Christina's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. Margaret, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, you're having an emotional reaction. This is exactly why we think you need professional care. You're not thinking clearly about what's best for everyone. I felt like I was drowning. Like the walls of my own home were closing in around me. These people, my son, the woman I'd welcomed into my family, treated like a daughter, they were talking about me like I was a burden to be disposed of. What about the money? I asked suddenly. $52 million. Surely that's enough to. I mean, you could buy a big house in California and still help me keep this one. You could. The money isn't yours, Mom, David said quietly. The words stopped me cold. What? Christina smiled, and it was the cruelest expression I'd ever seen on another human being's face. The ticket was in David's name, she said. The winnings are ours. Not yours. I felt the blood drain from my face. But I signed something. That paper you showed me. Oh, that, Christina said, waving her hand dismissively. That was just to make sure everything was legal if something happened to David. You're not actually entitled to any of the money. The room started to spin. I grabbed the back of my chair for support, my knuckles white against the faded fabric. I need to sit down, I whispered. Mom, are you okay? David started to get up, but Christina put a hand on his arm to stop him. She's fine, Christina said. She's just processing. Processing. Like I was a computer running a program instead of a human being whose heart was being torn apart by the two people I loved most in the world. I sank back into my chair, staring at the coffee stain spreading across my floor. Such a small thing, a broken coffee cup, but it felt symbolic somehow. Like everything precious and fragile in my life was being shattered, and I was powerless to stop it. When? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. When what? Christina asked. When do you want me gone? David and Christina exchanged another look, and I saw him nod slightly. We were thinking next month, Christina said. That gives you time to sort through your things, decide what you want to keep and what you want to donate. Next month. 4 weeks to dismantle a lifetime. 4 weeks to pack up 43 years of marriage, 34 years of raising a son, 72 years of existing. And Emma? I asked. Emma will understand, David said, though his voice was uncertain. Kids are resilient. She'll make new friends in California. Will I see her again? The silence that followed was answer enough. Christina stood up, smoothing down her skirt like she'd just finished a business meeting. We should go, she said to David. We have appointments with real estate agents this afternoon. David stood as well, and for a moment he hesitated. He looked at me sitting in my chair, surrounded by the ruins of my family, and I thought I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and tell me they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. "Mom," he said softly. "I'm sorry. I really am. But this is what's best for everyone." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat felt like it was full of broken glass. They left without kissing me goodbye, without hugging me, without any of the small gestures of love that had punctuated our family gatherings for 34 years. I heard their car start in the driveway, heard them drive away, and then I was alone with the coffee stain and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I sat in that chair for 3 hours. I watched the light change from morning brightness to afternoon gold to evening shadows, and I didn't move. I couldn't move. Because moving would mean accepting that this was real, that my son and his wife had just told me I was disposable. When I finally stood up, my legs were stiff and my back ached. I walked to the kitchen and got paper towels to clean up the coffee. As I knelt on the floor, scrubbing at the stain, I started to cry. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but the ugly, body-racking sobs of someone whose heart is being ripped out of their chest. I cried for the Sunday dinners that would never happen again. I cried for the granddaughter I was losing. I cried for the son I'd raised who had looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't wanted anymore. But mostly, I cried because I believed them. I believed that I was powerless, that I had no choice, that I would have to pack up my life and disappear into some sterile facility where I could wither away quietly and conveniently. That night, as I lay in the bed I'd shared with Robert for 37 years, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar creaks and settles of my house, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight this. I was going to be the good mother, the cooperative grandmother, the easy solution to their problem. I would pack my things, I would move to Sunset Manor, and I would try to be grateful that they were taking care of me. What I didn't know was that sometimes, the universe has a sense of humor. Sometimes, the people who think they've won everything are about to discover they've actually lost the most important thing of all. Sometimes, the powerless old woman they're discarding has more power than anyone could possibly imagine. But I wouldn't learn that for another 2 days. 2 days after my world collapsed, I woke up to the sound of hammering. It was 7:43 a.m., I remember checking the clock because the noise was so aggressive, so violent, that it felt like someone was trying to break into my skull. I stumbled to the window in my nightgown, my hair a mess, my eyes still swollen from crying myself to sleep for the second night in a row. What I saw in my driveway made my blood turn to ice water. A bright yellow truck with Sunset Manor Assisted Living painted on the side in cheerful blue letters. 2 men in uniforms were unloading a wheelchair ramp from the back, and a woman in a crisp white blouse was walking toward my front door with a clipboard in her hands. They hadn't even waited for me to agree. They'd made the arrangements without asking me, without consulting me, like I was a piece of furniture being moved from one room to another. The woman, her name tag read, Sandra, intake coordinator, knocked on my door with the kind of confident authority that comes from someone who's used to dealing with confused, frightened old people. "Mrs. Patterson," she called through the door. "We're here for your assessment and transition planning." Assessment. Like I was a house being evaluated for structural damage. I opened the door in my nightgown and robe, not caring how I looked. Pride seemed like a luxury I could no longer afford. "There's been a mistake," I said. "I didn't call you." Sandra smiled with practiced patience. "Your son David arranged everything. He's paid for your first 6 months at Sunset Manor, and he wanted us to expedite the process. He's concerned about you living alone." The words hit me like a slap. David had paid for 6 months of my imprisonment. He'd spent money, his lottery money, our lottery money, to get rid of me as quickly as possible. "I need to call him," I said, reaching for the phone. "Oh, you don't need to worry about that," Sandra said, stepping into my house uninvited. "He's handling all the arrangements from California. He and his wife are very busy with their move." California. They were already in California. They'd left without saying goodbye. When? I whispered. When what, dear? When did they leave? Sandra consulted her clipboard. Yesterday morning, according to my notes. But don't worry, they've thought of everything. You're going to love Sunset Manor. We have bingo on Tuesdays, craft time on Thursdays, and movie nights every Saturday. Bingo. Crafts. Movie nights. The breadcrumbs of a life reduced to scheduled activities and institutional meals. The two men with the ramp were now in my living room, measuring doorways and making notes about furniture removal. One of them, a kind-faced man in his 50s, caught my eye and gave me a sympathetic smile. Don't worry, ma'am, he said gently. We'll take good care of your things. Anything you want to keep, we'll make sure it gets to your new room safely. My new room. Singular. One room for 72 years of living. Sandra was walking through my house now, making notes on her clipboard, categorizing my life into keep, donate, and dispose. She held up a photograph of Robert and me on our wedding day. We looked so young, so hopeful, so absolutely certain that love would be enough to carry us through anything. This is lovely, she said. We can definitely find space for a few personal photos in your room. A few. Not all of them. Just a few selected memories to make my cage feel more like home. I need some time, I said, my voice barely functioning. This is all happening too fast. Sandra's smile never wavered, but something sharp flickered in her eyes. I'm afraid your son was very clear about the timeline, Mrs. Patterson. He's concerned about your safety living alone, especially after your episode. My episode? The emotional outburst when he visited. He mentioned you became quite agitated, broke some dishes, had difficulty controlling your reactions. It's very common for people your age when they're under stress. I stared at her, understanding dawning like a sick sunrise. David had lied. He'd told them I was mentally unstable, that I'd had some kind of breakdown. He'd painted me as a confused, potentially dangerous old woman who couldn't be trusted to take care of herself. The broken coffee cup had become evidence of my incompetence. My tears had become proof of my mental decline. My shock at being discarded by my own family had been twisted into a narrative that made me the problem, not them. That's not what happened, I said, but Sandra was already nodding with the kind of professional understanding that meant she'd heard this denial before from dozens of other confused elderly people. Of course, dear. Memory can be tricky at our age. That's why you'll be so much better off with professional care. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her until she understood that I wasn't confused, wasn't incompetent, wasn't anything except a mother whose son had decided she was disposable. But I could see in her eyes that anything I said would only confirm their narrative. Protest too little, and I was in denial. Protest too much, and I was agitated and unstable. It was a perfect trap, and my son had built it around me with the precision of someone who knew exactly which lies would stick. How long do I have? I asked. We're planning to complete the transition by Friday, Sandra said brightly. That gives you 3 days to sort through your belongings and say goodbye to the house. We find that quick transitions are easier for everyone involved. 3 days. 72 years of life, and I had 3 days to pack it up and move on. The men finished their measurements and started carrying boxes into my living room, boxes that would hold whatever pieces of my existence they deemed appropriate for institutional living. I watched them work with the efficiency of people who did this every day, who moved confused old people from their homes to warehouses for the elderly with the casual professionalism of furniture movers. After they left, I sat in Robert's chair and stared at the boxes. They were sturdy, practical brown cardboard, completely impersonal. The kind of boxes you use when you're moving to a place you don't want to go. That's when I remembered the paper David had asked me to sign. The legal document that I'd signed without reading, trusting my son to have my best interests at heart. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the small fireproof box where I kept important documents, birth certificates, Robert's death certificate, insurance papers, the deed to the house. At the bottom, I found a copy of the paper David had given me. It wasn't a lottery beneficiary form like he'd said. It was something called a lottery ticket ownership transfer agreement. Legal language that I barely understood, but the important parts were clear enough. I, Margaret and Patterson, hereby transfer all ownership, rights, and claims to Iowa lottery ticket number 47291856 to my son, David Robert Patterson, effective immediately upon signing this document. In the event of any winnings from said ticket, I waive all rights to said winnings and acknowledge that David Robert Patterson is the sole owner and beneficiary. At the bottom, my signature. Margaret and Patterson, signed in my careful schoolteacher handwriting. Yes, I'd been a schoolteacher for 37 years before I retired to take care of Robert during his illness. But there was something else. Something that made me read the document 3 more times before I understood what I was seeing. The ticket number on the document, #47291856, didn't match the ticket David had shown me that Sunday. The ticket he'd pulled from his pocket had been crumpled, worn, handled many times. But I remembered the number because it had seemed odd to me, number 527388194. I stared at the discrepancy, my mind working slowly through the implications. Why would the numbers be different? Why would David have one ticket but ask me to sign away rights to a different one? My hands were shaking as I reached for the phone. I called the Iowa Lottery office, my voice trembling as I asked to speak to someone about ticket verification. I need to check if a ticket has been claimed, I told the woman who answered. I can help you with that, she said kindly. What's the ticket number? I gave her both numbers, the one from the document and the one I remembered David showing me. Ticket number 527388194 was claimed 3 days ago, she said. $52 million jackpot, claimed by David Robert Patterson of Cedar Rapids. My heart stopped. And ticket number 47291856? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Let me check, that ticket was purchased at Murphy's gas station on Highway 36 months ago. It's still active, hasn't been claimed. But it's only worth $2, it matched one number in a drawing from last month. I hung up the phone with hands that shook so badly I could barely hold it. David had tricked me. He'd shown me one ticket, the winning ticket, but had me sign away rights to a different ticket. A worthless ticket. Which meant that legally, according to the document I'd signed, I had no claim to the worthless ticket. But the winning ticket, the ticket worth $52 million, was still technically mine. David's name might be on the claim form at the lottery office, but my signature wasn't on any document that transferred ownership of that specific ticket. I read the document again, this time with the sharp focus that comes from hope and desperation. David had made a mistake. In his eagerness to trick me into signing away my rights, he'd used the wrong ticket number. The transfer agreement was for a ticket worth $2, not the $52 million jackpot. For the first time in 3 days, I smiled. Then I picked up the phone and called a lawyer. His name was James Mitchell, and I'd known him for 15 years. He'd handled Robert's will and helped us with some property boundary issues with our neighbor back in 2018. He was in his early 60s, sharp as a tack, and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when his clients had been wronged. Margaret? His voice was surprised when I called. How are you holding up? I'd forgotten that he'd known Robert well, that he'd been at the funeral, that he understood what the past 8 years had been like for me. James, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I need your help. And I need you to keep this completely confidential. Of course. What's going on? I told him everything. David's request to use my name. The document I'd signed. The visit from Sandra and the forced move to Sunset Manor. The discrepancy between the ticket numbers. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. James? Are you there? I'm here, he said, and his voice had changed completely. Gone was the gentle concern, replaced by something that sounded like barely controlled fury. Margaret, do you still have the document you signed? Yes, it's right here. Don't let anyone else see it. Don't mention this conversation to anyone. Can you get to my office tomorrow morning? I think so, but 9 a.m. sharp. And Margaret? Don't pack anything else. Don't sign anything else. And for God's sake, don't go to that nursing home. After I hung up, I sat in Robert's chair and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. For 3 days, I'd felt like a victim, like a problem to be solved, like a burden to be disposed of. But now I understood that I wasn't powerless at all. I was the rightful owner of a $52 million lottery ticket, and my son had just committed fraud. That evening, as I was heating up a can of soup for dinner, my phone rang. David's number appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment, I considered not answering. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe the need to hear his voice one more time before I destroyed his life, made me pick up. Hi, Mom. He sounded tired, stressed. How are you doing? How was I doing? I almost laughed at the question. I'm managing, I said carefully. Good, good. Listen, Christina and I are settling in out here, and it's been crazy busy with the house hunting and everything. I heard the people from Sunset Manor came by today. Yes, they did. And everything went okay? You're feeling better about the move? I closed my eyes, listening to my son lie to me with the practiced ease of someone who'd been planning this deception for weeks. David, I said, can I ask you something? Sure, Mom. Anything. Do you remember the ticket number on that lottery ticket you showed me? The winning one? There was a pause. A tiny hesitation that told me everything I needed to know. Why would you ask that? He said, trying to sound casual and failing. Just curious. It's such a big moment in our family's history. I thought I might want to remember the exact number. Mom, I don't think. I mean, those numbers are pretty meaningless now, right? The important thing is that we won. We. Even now, he was saying we when he meant they. You're probably right, I said. It was silly of me to ask. Are you feeling okay? You sound strange. I'm fine, David. Just tired. It's been a long day. Yeah, I bet. But Mom, you're going to love Sunset Manor. They have all kinds of activities, and you'll make friends. It's going to be good for you. Good for me. Like a bitter medicine I should be grateful to swallow. I'm sure it will be, I said. Great. Well, I should go. Christina wants to look at another house tonight, and the real estate agent is meeting us in an hour. Of course. Don't let me keep you. Love you, Mom. The words hit me like a physical blow. Love you. How do you tell someone you love them while you're systematically destroying their life? Love you too, sweetheart, I said, and hung up before he could hear me crying. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Robert died. I pulled out a bottle of wine, a nice Merlot that someone had given us for our 40th wedding anniversary and that I'd been saving for a special occasion. Sitting alone in my kitchen at 72 years old, about to wage war against my own son, seemed special enough. I poured myself a glass and walked through my house, really looking at it for the first time in days. This was my home. Every inch of it held memories. The kitchen where I'd taught David to make pancakes. The living room where we'd opened Christmas presents for 34 years. The bedroom where Robert and I had loved each other, fought with each other, forgiven each other, and held each other through 4 decades of marriage. In 3 days, strangers were going to come in here and pack up my life. But not if I had anything to say about it. I raised my wine glass to the empty house. To Robert, I said out loud. I hope you're watching, honey, because your wife is about to raise some hell. The wine burned slightly going down, but it warmed me from the inside out. For the first time since David and Christina had walked into my house with their cruel plans, I felt like myself again. Not a confused old woman who could be manipulated and discarded. Not a burden or a complication. I was Margaret and Patterson, and I was about to remind my son exactly who he was dealing with. James Mitchell's office was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town lawyer who'd been practicing for 30 years, wood paneling, leather-bound books, and the kind of solid oak desk that suggested both competence and permanence. But when I walked in that morning, carrying the lottery document in a manila envelope clutched against my chest like armor, James looked anything but comfortable. He was pacing behind his desk, his usually immaculate silver hair slightly mussed, his tie loosened despite it being only 9 in the morning. When he saw me, he stopped pacing and gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit, he said, then immediately softened his tone. Please, Margaret. We have a lot to discuss. I sat down carefully, my purse in my lap, the envelope still pressed against my chest. James resumed his pacing. I spent half the night researching Iowa lottery law, he said. The other half I spent absolutely furious on your behalf. What did you find? He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. What I found, Margaret, is that your son is either incredibly stupid or incredibly arrogant. Probably both. He sat down and pulled out a yellow legal pad covered in notes. Let's start with the basics. You signed a document transferring ownership of lottery ticket number 47291856. That ticket is worth exactly $2. Meanwhile, your son claimed winnings on ticket number 527389194, which is worth $52 million. So legally, the big ticket is still mine? Not just legally, James said, his voice grim. Completely and entirely yours. Your son has no legal claim to those winnings whatsoever. I felt a mixture of elation and nausea. What does that mean exactly? James leaned forward, his expression serious. It means your son has committed lottery fraud. It means he's stolen $52 million. And it means that with one phone call to the Iowa Lottery Commission, I can have those winnings frozen and transferred back to you within 48 hours. The magnitude of it hit me like a truck. David hadn't just tricked me, he'd committed a felony. A federal crime. The kind of crime that carried prison time. But James, I said slowly, if I do this, what happens to David? His expression softened slightly. Margaret, I need you to understand something. Your son didn't make a simple mistake. This was premeditated fraud. He deliberately deceived you, he's attempting to institutionalize you against your will, and he's stolen money that legally belongs to you. We're not talking about a family disagreement here. We're talking about serious crimes. I stared at the legal pad, at his careful handwriting outlining my son's criminal behavior. What would happen to him if we pursued this? James sighed. Lottery fraud is a federal offense. Given the amount involved, he'd be looking at potentially 20 years in prison. The money would be seized, frozen, investigated. Christina would likely be charged as an accessory after the fact. And Emma? The question hung in the air like smoke. James's expression grew even more somber. Emma would be without parents while they served their sentences. She'd likely go into foster care, or possibly to Christina's family if they have any. I closed my eyes, seeing my granddaughter's face. Sweet Emma with her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, who helped me mash potatoes and painted me coffee mugs and called me every Tuesday just to tell me about her day. Emma, who had no idea her parents were criminals. There has to be another way, I said. James leaned back in his chair. There might be. But Margaret, I need you to understand that any alternative approach still requires you to hold the winning ticket over their heads. You can't negotiate from a position of weakness. What kind of alternative? We could approach them privately first. Present the evidence. Demand the return of your money and your dignity. Give them a chance to make this right before we involve law enforcement. I thought about this. It would mean confronting David and Christina with proof of their fraud. It would mean looking my son in the eye and telling him I knew he'd tried to steal from me. What are the chances they'd cooperate? James's smile was sharp as a blade. When faced with 20 years in federal prison, I'd say the chances are excellent. That afternoon, James and I drove to the Iowa Lottery Commission office in Des Moines. It was a sterile government building, all fluorescent lights and beige carpeting, but to me it felt like the most important place in the world. The woman behind the information desk was helpful but confused when James explained what we needed. You want to verify the original purchaser of a winning ticket that's already been claimed? She asked. That's correct, James said. My client believes there may have been some irregularities in the claim process. We were directed to a small conference room where we met with a lottery official named Robert Carson, a thin, nervous man in his 40s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. This is highly unusual, Carson said, spreading papers across the conference table. Once a ticket has been claimed and the winner has been verified, we don't typically revisit the ownership question. What does your verification process typically involve? James asked. Carson shifted uncomfortably. The claimant presents the winning ticket, provides identification, and signs affidavits swearing that they are the rightful owner. We don't generally investigate the purchase history unless there's a specific complaint. Well, James said pleasantly, consider this a specific complaint. Carson looked through his files. The ticket in question was claimed by David Robert Patterson. He provided valid identification, had the physical ticket in his possession, and signed all the required documentation. Did he provide any proof of purchase? I asked. Proof of purchase isn't required if the claimant has physical possession of the ticket, Carson explained. The assumption is that possession equals ownership. James leaned forward. What if I told you that the ticket was originally purchased by someone else? Someone who can prove they bought it? Carson's expression changed. Do you have such proof? I reached into my purse and pulled out something I'd found the night before while going through my papers, my bank statement from 6 months ago. There, highlighted in yellow marker, was a charge for $2 at Murphy's gas station on Highway 30, dated the same day the winning ticket was purchased. I also had the security footage request form that James had helped me file that morning. Murphy's gas station kept their security recordings for 1 year, and the footage from 6 months ago clearly showed me purchasing a single lottery ticket at 3:47 p.m. on the date in question. Carson stared at the bank statement, then at the security footage request. This is very problematic. It gets worse, James said. He pulled out the document I'd signed, the one transferring ownership of the worthless ticket. My client was defrauded into signing away rights to a different ticket entirely. The claimant used a classic bait-and-switch technique. Carson was now visibly sweating. If what you're alleging is true, this represents serious fraud. We'd need to freeze the winnings immediately pending a full investigation. That's exactly what we want, James said. 20 minutes later, we walked out of the lottery office with a temporary freeze order on David's winnings. The $52 million that he'd already started spending, on the house in California, on my forced institutionalization, on whatever lavish lifestyle he and Christina were planning, was now locked up tighter than Fort Knox. But more importantly, we had something else. We had power. That evening, James helped me craft a letter. Not to David, we'd call him instead, since he was in California, but to Sandra at Sunset Manor. The letter was short and to the point. Dear Miss Sandra. Due to a significant change in my family's financial circumstances, the arrangements for my placement at Sunset Manor must be cancelled immediately. The individual who made these arrangements no longer has the legal authority to make decisions on my behalf, and all costs associated with my care will not be honored. Please remove all equipment from my property and cancel all scheduled services effective immediately. Sincerely, Margaret and Patterson **. Think they'll understand what that means? I asked James as I signed the letter. Oh, they'll understand, he said grimly. The minute David's credit card gets declined, they'll understand perfectly. That night, I sat in my kitchen with another glass of wine and my telephone, staring at David's number written on a piece of paper. James had advised me to call him the next morning, when I'd be sharp and he'd potentially be caught off guard. But I couldn't wait. I needed to hear his voice when he realized that his perfect plan had fallen apart. I dialed his number at 9:47 p.m. Iowa time, which made it 7:47 p.m. in California. Christina answered on the third ring. Margaret? Her voice was surprised. Is everything okay? Did something happen at the nursing home? I almost laughed at the irony. Something had happened, but not what she was expecting. Hello, Christina, I said, my voice perfectly calm. Is David available? I need to speak with him about something important. He's in the shower, but I can take a message. Is it about your move tomorrow? Tomorrow. They'd expected me to be gone tomorrow, shipped off to institutional oblivion while they celebrated their new fortune. Actually, I said, I think you should hear this too. Could you put me on speaker when David gets out? Something in my tone must have worried her, because her voice changed. Margaret, what's going on? You're scaring me. Oh, Christina, I said, and I couldn't keep the smile out of my voice. You have no idea how scared you should be. 5 minutes later, I heard David's voice join the call, slightly breathless from rushing out of the shower. Mom? Christina said you sounded upset. What's wrong? What's wrong? The question almost made me laugh out loud. Everything was wrong. They tried to steal from me, abandon me, erase me from their lives like I was a mistake that needed correcting. But now, for the first time in days, something was finally right. David, sweetheart, I said, letting the endearment drip with honey-sweet venom, I need to ask you about that lottery ticket. Silence. Complete, absolute silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear their hearts stopping. What about it, Mom? Well, I was going through some old papers today, and I found something interesting. Do you remember that document you had me sign? The one about the lottery ticket? Another pause. Shorter this time, but I could hear whispering in the background, Christina and David conferring in frantic, hushed tones. Mom, I don't really remember the details. Why are you asking about this now? The lies came so easily to him. Even caught red-handed, he was still trying to manipulate me. The details are fascinating, actually, I said, settling back in my chair like I was discussing the weather. It turns out that the document I signed transferred ownership of ticket number 47291856. But the ticket you claimed, the $52 million ticket, was number 527389194. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear my own heartbeat. Mom, I think you might be confused about the numbers. David. My voice cut through his attempted explanation like a knife through butter. Stop lying to me. I heard Christina say something in the background, but I couldn't make out the words. The Lottery Commission was very interested in my documentation, I continued. Bank records showing my purchase of the winning ticket. Security footage from Murphy's gas station. They were especially interested in how someone could claim winnings for a ticket they didn't actually own. Mom, this is crazy. What's crazy, I said, my voice rising slightly, is that my own son tried to steal $52 million from me. What's crazy is that you were going to ship me off to a nursing home to die while you spent my money. What's crazy is that you looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't wanted anymore. I heard Christina's voice more clearly now. Oh, God. Oh, God, David, she knows. I know everything, I said. I know about the fraud. I know about the forged documents. And as of this afternoon, the Iowa Lottery Commission knows too. What does that mean? David's voice was barely a whisper. It means, my dear son, that your $52 million is currently frozen in a government account while they investigate lottery fraud charges. It means your credit cards are about to stop working. It means that fancy California house you're buying is going to disappear faster than your conscience apparently did. The sounds coming from the other end of the phone were somewhere between sobs and hyperventilation. Christina was crying, David was trying to calm her down, and somewhere in the background I could hear what sounded like breaking glass. Mom, please, David said, and his voice was different now. Desperate. The confident man who'd sat in my living room 3 days ago and told me I was disposable was gone, replaced by a frightened boy who'd been caught stealing from the cookie jar. Please, we can fix this. We can work something out. Can we? I asked. How exactly do you propose we fix felony fraud charges, David? Felony? Christina's voice was a shriek. David, you said this would work. You said she'd never figure it out. The betrayal in her voice was almost funny. She was upset that their criminal conspiracy wasn't working out as planned. What were you planning to do with me, David? I asked. Were you going to visit me at Sunset Manor? Bring Emma to see her grandmother rotting away in some institutional hellhole? Or were you just going to forget I existed? Mom, it wasn't like that. What was it like? I demanded. Explain to me how stealing my money and abandoning me was somehow an act of love. I heard David crying now. Actually crying. And for a moment, just one moment, my heart softened toward the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares. But then I remembered Sandra from Sunset Manor, measuring my house like it was a crime scene. I remembered the boxes they'd brought to pack up my life. I remembered the cold calculation in Christina's eyes when she told me I was a complication. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and clear. You have 48 hours to get back to Iowa. You're going to sit in my living room, the living room you were going to empty out like I'd never existed, and you're going to explain to me exactly how we're going to fix this. What do you want? Christina asked, her voice thick with tears and panic. What did I want? The question hung in the air like smoke. What did I want from the son who'd tried to destroy my life and the daughter-in-law who'd orchestrated it? I want my money back, I said. I want my granddaughter back. I want my family back. And I want to never, ever feel as worthless as you made me feel 3 days ago. The money's already tied up in deposits and contracts, David said desperately. The house in California, the furniture, the cars. Then you better figure out how to untie it, I said. Because the alternative is 20 years in federal prison. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. I talked to a lawyer today. James Mitchell, you remember him, David. He handled your father's estate. He explained to me exactly what lottery fraud means in terms of criminal penalties. Federal crime, David. Not state court, not plea bargains, not suspended sentences. Federal prison. Christina was sobbing openly now. We didn't mean for it to happen like this, she said. We thought you'd be happier somewhere with people your own age, and the money would help us give Emma a better life. Stop. The word came out harder than I'd intended. Do not use Emma as an excuse for what you did. Do not pretend that stealing from her grandmother was somehow for her benefit. What about Emma? David asked, and I could hear the fear in his voice. If we go to prison, what happens to her? And there it was. The one question that had kept me awake all night, the one consideration that made this whole situation impossibly complicated. Emma, sweet Emma, who had no idea her parents were criminals, who would be destroyed by their imprisonment. That depends, I said carefully, on how willing you are to make this right. What do you mean? I mean that I don't want to destroy Emma's life to fix mine. But I also won't let you destroy mine to protect yours. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden where Robert and I had planted our first tomatoes 40 years ago. You have 48 hours, I repeated. Get back to Iowa. Come to my house. Bring Emma. And come prepared to explain to me how you're going to fix what you've broken. And if we do that? David asked. If we come back and try to make this right? I considered the question carefully. They deserved to go to prison. They deserved to lose everything they tried to steal from me. But Emma deserved better than having criminal parents. If you can convince me that you're genuinely sorry, I said, if you can prove to me that you understand what you did wrong, and if you can figure out how to make me whole again, then maybe we can find a way to handle this as a family instead of through the courts. Really? Christina's voice was desperate, hopeful. Maybe, I said. But understand this, both of you, I am not the same woman you walked all over 3 days ago. I am not confused, I am not helpless, and I am definitely not powerless. You tried to steal from me, and I caught you. You tried to abandon me, and I fought back. You thought I was just some disposable old woman you could push around. I paused, looking at my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman looking back at me was older, yes. Grayer, more lined, wearing a dress that had seen better decades. But her eyes were sharp, and her spine was straight, and her voice was steady. You were wrong about me, I said. You were so very, very wrong. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. For the next 10 minutes, I sat in perfect silence, processing what had just happened. 3 days ago, I'd been a victim, scared, confused, powerless. Now I was something else entirely. I was a woman who'd discovered that her family had betrayed her, and who'd found the strength to fight back. My phone rang again almost immediately. David's number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. On the 4th call, I answered. What? Mom, please, we need to talk about this more. No, I said. We don't. You have 48 hours. If you're not in my living room by Thursday at noon, my lawyer calls the FBI. Those are your choices. I hung up again. The phone didn't ring after that. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Robert died. I ordered pizza. Not because I was hungry, exactly, but because I could. Because I was staying in my own house, sleeping in my own bed, making my own decisions about what to eat and when to eat it. The delivery boy was a teenager, maybe 17, with acne and kind eyes. You having a party, ma'am? He asked, noticing that I'd ordered enough food for 4 people. You could say that, I told him, tipping him $20. I'm celebrating my independence. He looked confused but smiled anyway. Well, happy Independence Day, then. Thank you, I said, and meant it more than he could possibly know. I ate pizza in Robert's chair and watched the evening news, and for the first time in 3 days, the house felt like home again. Not because anything had really changed yet. David and Christina were still in California, the money was still frozen, Emma was still caught in the middle of a mess she didn't understand. But something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore for other people to decide my fate. I wasn't accepting anymore that I was powerless. I was Margaret and Patterson, and I had just reminded the world, and myself, exactly who that meant. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. Thursday morning dawned gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that makes everything look washed out and tired. I woke up at 6 a.m., not because I had to, but because I couldn't sleep anymore. For the first time in months, I had something to look forward to. Something that felt like justice. I made coffee in my good china, not the everyday mugs, but the delicate cups with the rose pattern that my mother had given me for my wedding. I put on my best dress, the emerald green one I'd worn to Emma's school play last spring. I even applied lipstick and a touch of mascara. If my son and his wife were coming to grovel, I was going to look like a woman who deserved their apologies. At 11:45 a.m., I heard a car in the driveway. Not the confident purr of their usual SUV, but the tired wheeze of something that sounded like it had seen better days. I looked out the window and saw a rental car, a basic sedan, white and anonymous. David got out first, looking haggard and older than his 34 years. Christina followed, her designer clothes wrinkled, her usual perfectly styled hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. But it was Emma who broke my heart. My beautiful granddaughter climbed out of the back seat looking confused and worried, carrying a small backpack and looking around like she wasn't sure where she was or why she was there. They walked to my front door slowly, like they were approaching a gallows. David raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Through the window, I could see him take a deep breath, gathering courage. I opened the door before he could knock. "Hello, David." "Christina." I looked down at Emma, who was staring at me with wide, uncertain eyes. "Hello, sweetheart." "Grandma Margaret?" Emma's voice was small and confused. "Why are we here?" "Mommy said we were supposed to be in California, but then Daddy said we had to come back, and nobody will tell me what's happening." My heart clenched. Of course they hadn't told her the truth. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that her parents are criminals? "Come inside," I said, stepping back to let them enter. "We need to talk." They filed into my living room like prisoners being led to their sentencing. David and Christina sat stiffly on the sofa, while Emma perched on the edge of Robert's chair, looking between the adults with growing anxiety. "Emma," I said gently, "why don't you go up to your daddy's old room? There are some books up there, and some of his old toys. I need to talk to your parents about grown-up things." "But Grandma." "Go ahead, sweetheart. We'll call you down in a little while." Emma looked to her parents for permission. David nodded, his face pale and drawn. After she disappeared upstairs, I turned to face my son and his wife. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, David spoke. "Mom, No." I held up my hand to stop him. "Before you say anything, I want you to look around this room. Really look at it." They both glanced around obediently, taking in the familiar surroundings, the family photos, the handmade quilts, the furniture that had been in the same places for decades. "This is the room where you opened Christmas presents for 34 years, I said to David. "This is where you brought Christina to meet me for the first time. This is where Emma took her first steps. This is where your father and I told you we were proud of you when you graduated high school." David's eyes were beginning to fill with tears. "3 days ago, you sat on that sofa and told me I didn't belong here anymore. You told me I was a burden. You told me I needed to be put away somewhere convenient so you could live your new life without the complication of your mother. Mom, we didn't mean." "Yes, you did." My voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "You absolutely meant it. You had already made arrangements to have me institutionalized. You had already decided how to divide up my belongings. You had already written me out of your lives." Christina was crying now, silently, tears streaming down her face. "And the worst part," I continued, "the absolute worst part, is that you were going to take Emma away from me forever. You were going to rob her of her grandmother and rob me of my granddaughter, and you were going to do it with my own money. We thought." Christina's voice was barely a whisper. "We thought you'd be happier." Stop lying. The words exploded out of me with more force than I'd intended. Stop lying to me and stop lying to yourselves. You didn't care if I was happy. You cared that I was inconvenient. David broke down completely then, sobbing like the little boy who used to run to me when he skinned his knees. I'm sorry, he gasped between sobs. Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know how I became someone who could do that to you. I watched him cry, and part of me, the part that had rocked him to sleep 1,000 times, that had nursed him through every childhood illness, that had loved him unconditionally for 34 years, wanted to forgive him immediately. But the other part of me, the part that had spent 3 days believing I was worthless and unwanted, wasn't ready to let him off the hook. How did this happen, David? I asked. How did you go from being my son to being someone who could steal from me? He looked up at me, his face blotchy and tear-stained. The money, he said. When we realized we'd won, it was like everything changed. All I could think about was what we could do with it. The house, the cars, Emma's education, not having to worry about bills anymore. So you decided to steal it from me. We convinced ourselves that you'd signed it over willingly, Christina said, her voice shaking. We told ourselves that you wanted us to have it, that you'd be happier if we took care of the details. But you knew I hadn't signed away the right ticket. David nodded miserably. I switched the numbers. I thought you'd never check, never realize. I thought it would be easier for everyone if the money just legally belonged to us from the beginning. Easier for everyone, I repeated. Everyone except me. We were going to take care of you, Christina insisted. The nursing home was expensive, but it was a good one. You would have been comfortable. I looked at her with something approaching pity. Even now, even caught in their fraud, she was still trying to convince herself that they'd done something noble. Christina, I said, do you know what the worst part about getting old is? She shook her head. It's not the arthritis or the gray hair or the way young people look at you like you're invisible. The worst part is when the people you love most in the world start treating you like you don't matter anymore. Fresh tears started streaming down her face. You didn't put me in that nursing home because it was good for me. You put me there because it was convenient for you. Because it meant you could live your new rich lives without having to worry about an inconvenient old woman who might have opinions about how you spent her money. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up a framed photograph, David's high school graduation, all three of us smiling at the camera. Robert's arm around my shoulders, my hand resting proudly on David's chest. Your father would be ashamed of you, I said quietly. The words hit David like a physical blow. He doubled over, gasping. Don't, he begged. Please don't say that. It's true, I said, though the words hurt me almost as much as they hurt him. Your father spent his whole life teaching you to be honest, to take care of family, to do the right thing even when it was hard. And you threw all of that away for money. I set the photograph back on the mantelpiece and turned to face them both. But here's the thing, I said. Despite everything you've done to me, I don't want to destroy Emma's life. I don't want her to grow up visiting her parents in federal prison, wondering why Grandma Margaret sent Mommy and Daddy away. Hope flickered in both their eyes. So here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to fix this. All of it. You're going to make me whole, you're going to earn back my trust, and you're going to prove to me that somewhere inside the people who tried to steal from me are the son I raised and the daughter-in-law I welcomed into my family. How? David asked. Tell us how, and we'll do it. I had spent 2 days thinking about this moment, planning exactly what I would demand from them. Justice, yes, but not the kind that would destroy Emma's childhood. First, I said, the money gets transferred back to me. All of it. Every penny that's currently frozen gets put into an account with my name on it. They both nodded eagerly. Second, you cancel whatever arrangements you've made in California. The house, the cars, whatever deposits you've put down. You come back to Iowa, and you rebuild the life you had before you decided to become criminals. Okay, Christina said quickly. We can do that. Third, and this is non-negotiable, you go to therapy. Both of you. Family counseling to figure out how you became people who could do this to someone you claimed to love. David wiped his eyes. Yes, absolutely. Fourth, you make restitution for what you put me through. The emotional trauma, the attempted institutionalization, the days I spent thinking my family had thrown me away like garbage. What kind of restitution? Christina asked cautiously. I smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. You're going to take care of me. Not by shipping me off somewhere convenient, but by actually taking care of me. Sunday dinners every week, not because you have to but because you want to. Help with grocery shopping, yard work, house maintenance. You're going to act like the loving family you pretended to be. For how long? David asked. For as long as it takes for me to believe you mean it, I said. Maybe 6 months, maybe 6 years. That's up to you. They exchanged a look, and I could see them calculating, weighing their options. And if we do all of this? Christina asked. If we prove ourselves to you? Then maybe, we can figure out a way for you to share in the lottery winnings. Not as thieves who stole from me, but as family members who earned my generosity. The word, maybe, hung in the air like a lifeline they were both desperate to grab. But understand this, I continued. The money is mine. Legally, morally, completely mine. Any portion of it that you ever see will be because I choose to give it to you, not because you're entitled to it. And if you ever try to manipulate me or betray me again, I will have you both arrested so fast it will make your head spin. We understand, David said quickly. Do you? I asked. Because 3 days ago, you looked me in the eye and told me you loved me while you were systematically destroying my life. How do I know you're not doing the same thing right now? It was Christina who answered, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, she sounded sincere. Because 3 days ago, we thought we were untouchable, she said. We thought we were smarter than you, smarter than the system. We thought we could get away with anything because you were just a harmless old woman who wouldn't fight back. She looked around the room, taking in the evidence of my life, my history, my strength. We were wrong, she continued. You're not harmless. You're not helpless. And we're not smarter than you. We're just two people who got greedy and stupid and forgot who we were dealing with. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. But what I saw instead was something I hadn't expected, respect. For the first time since I'd known her, Christina was looking at me with genuine respect. You scared us, David added. When you called and told us what you'd discovered, when you explained that you could have us arrested. Mom, I've never been so terrified in my life. Not of going to prison, but of losing you forever. Of having Emma grow up knowing that her father was the kind of man who stole from his own mother. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not forgiveness, it was too early for that. But maybe the beginning of a possibility of eventual forgiveness. Emma doesn't know any of this? I asked. Nothing, David said. We told her we had to come back to Iowa to take care of some business. She thinks we're staying here for a few days and then going back to California. Well, I said, walking toward the staircase, I think it's time we told her the truth. Not all of it, but enough that she understands we're staying. I called up the stairs. Emma, sweetheart? Can you come down here please? A few seconds later, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, looking worried. Are you done with your grown-up talk? We are. Come sit with me. Emma came down and curled up next to me on the sofa, instinctively seeking comfort from the adult who had always been her safe harbor. "Emma," I said gently, "there's been a change of plans. You're not going to California after all." Her face fell. "Why not?" I looked at David and Christina, giving them a chance to speak. David cleared his throat. "Because we realized that California isn't where we belong," he said. "Our family is here. Grandma Margaret is here. We were making a mistake by trying to leave." Emma looked confused but hopeful. "So we're staying? I can keep going to my school and seeing my friends?" "Yes," Christina said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're staying." Emma turned to me. "And I can keep having Sunday dinners with you?" "Every Sunday," I promised. "For as long as you want them." She threw her arms around my neck, squeezing tight. "I'm so glad," she whispered. "I didn't want to leave you, Grandma Margaret. I was scared I'd never see you again." Over Emma's shoulder, I looked at David and Christina. They were both crying again, but this time it was different. This time they weren't crying because they'd been caught. They were crying because they were finally understanding what they'd almost lost. "I love you, Grandma Margaret," Emma said. "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, holding her close. "More than you'll ever know." And in that moment, sitting in my living room with my granddaughter in my arms and my son and daughter-in-law looking at me with something that might eventually become genuine respect, I realized something important. Revenge wasn't just about punishment. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge was showing people who had underestimated you exactly who you really were. Sometimes, the greatest victory wasn't destroying your enemies, it was turning them back into your family. But the story wasn't over yet. Because having $52 million changes everything, and trust, once broken, takes a very long time to rebuild. The real test was still to come. The next few weeks passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. David and Christina rented a small apartment across town, nothing like the mansion they'd planned to buy in California, but clean and adequate for a family learning to live within their means again. Every evening, David would call to check on me. Every few days, Christina would stop by to help with grocery shopping or housework. They were trying, I could see that. But trying and meaning it are two different things. If you've ever had your trust completely shattered by someone you love, leave a comment below and tell me how long it took you to believe in them again. Because I need you to understand that forgiveness isn't a light switch you can just flip on. It's more like a sunrise, it happens slowly, degree by degree, and some mornings you wonder if it's going to happen at all. 3 weeks after their return, I was sitting in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning when I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Christina getting out of their rental car, but something was different. She wasn't moving with her usual purposeful stride. She was walking slowly, carefully, like someone carrying something fragile. When she knocked on my door, I could see through the window that she'd been crying. "Margaret," she called. Could I come in? I need to talk to you about something." I opened the door and immediately saw what was wrong. Christina was pale, shaking slightly, and there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before, genuine fear, but not the kind that comes from being caught in a lie. This was something deeper. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping aside to let her in. She sat down heavily at my kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her like she was praying. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About what kind of person I became. About what I did to you." She looked up at me, and her eyes were red with tears. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know that David doesn't know I'm here. This isn't about him, or about us trying to get back in your good graces. This is about me needing to understand how I became someone who could look at you, someone who had only ever been kind to me, and see you as an obstacle to get rid of." I sat down across from her, waiting. "Do you remember when David and I first got married?" she asked. "Of course." You welcomed me into this family like I was your own daughter. When my mother criticized everything about the wedding, you told her it was the most beautiful ceremony you'd ever seen. When I couldn't find a job after college, you never once made me feel like I wasn't contributing enough. When Emma was born, you drove to the hospital at 2 in the morning and stayed with me while David was out of town for work. She was crying openly now, but she kept talking. You have been nothing but generous and loving to me for 11 years. And somehow, somewhere along the way, I started seeing that generosity as weakness. I started thinking that because you were kind, you were stupid. Because you were gentle, you were pushable. I felt something twist in my chest. It wasn't anger this time, it was sadness. When did that happen? I asked. Christina wiped her eyes with a tissue from the box I kept on the table. I think it started when Robert got sick. You were taking care of him, and your whole world revolved around making his last months as comfortable as possible. You stopped doing things for yourself. You stopped buying new clothes, stopped going out with friends, stopped talking about anything except doctor appointments and medications. She paused, struggling with the words. I started seeing you as this pathetic old woman whose life was shrinking down to nothing. And instead of admiring you for sacrificing everything to take care of the man you loved, I started pitying you. I started thinking you were weak. The honesty of it hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I had become someone smaller during Robert's illness. I had let my world shrink down to the size of his hospital room. And when he died, Christina continued, and you struggled to figure out who you were without him. I should have been helping you find yourself again. Instead, I was judging you for being lost. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I need you to understand that what we did to you wasn't just about the money. It was about me thinking I was better than you. Smarter than you. More important than you. And I need you to know that I was wrong about all of it. She reached across the table and took my hand. Hers was cold and trembling. You're not weak, Margaret. You're the strongest person I know. You buried your husband, you raised a son mostly on your own after Robert's health started failing, you managed on a fixed income without ever complaining. And when we tried to destroy your life, you fought back and won. I squeezed her hand, not knowing what to say. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, Christina said. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I see you now. Really see you. And I'm ashamed of the person I was who could look at someone like you and think you didn't matter. We sat in silence for a long time, her hand in mine, both of us crying quietly. Finally, she spoke again. There's something else. Something I need to tell you about David. My stomach clenched. What about David? He's been having nightmares. Every night since we got back. He wakes up crying, talking about how he betrayed you. He keeps saying he doesn't know how to live with himself. He told me he was sorry. It's more than sorry, Christina interrupted. Margaret, I think he's having some kind of breakdown. Yesterday I found him in Emma's room, just sitting on her bed and staring at the wall. When I asked what was wrong, he said he was trying to figure out what kind of man his daughter was going to grow up thinking her father was. I felt a familiar maternal panic rise in my chest. Despite everything he'd done to me, David was still my son. The idea that he was suffering, truly suffering, made my heart ache. What do you want me to do? I asked. I don't know, Christina said. Maybe nothing. Maybe he needs to feel this way for a while. Maybe that's what it takes for someone to really change. She stood up, wiping her eyes again. I should go. Emma has a dentist appointment this afternoon, and I promised I'd pick her up from school early. She walked toward the door, then turned back. Margaret? The therapy you insisted we go to? I'm glad you made us do it. It's helping me understand how I became someone I don't recognize. Someone I don't want to be. After she left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about what she'd said. About how she'd started seeing my kindness as weakness, my gentleness as stupidity. About how David was having nightmares about betraying me. The truth was, I was having nightmares too. Not about what they'd done, but about what I'd almost lost. 3 weeks ago, I'd been preparing to live out my remaining years in institutional isolation, separated from the granddaughter I adored and the son I'd raised to be better than he'd shown himself to be. That evening, David called me as usual. But this time, instead of the stilted small talk we'd been making, I decided to be direct. "Christina came to see me today," I said. Silence on the other end of the line. "She told me about the nightmares." "Mom, David, are you okay?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For weeks, our conversations had been careful, formal, walking on eggshells. Neither of us had asked if the other was okay. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not okay. I don't think I've been okay since the day I looked at you and decided you were disposable. I don't know how I became that person, and I don't know how to live with having been him." "You're getting help," I said. "The therapist." "The therapist says I need to forgive myself," David interrupted. "But how do you forgive yourself for trying to steal from your own mother? How do you forgive yourself for planning to abandon the woman who raised you?" I thought about that question. In the weeks since they'd returned, I'd been so focused on whether I could forgive them that I hadn't considered whether they could forgive themselves. "David," I said, "do you remember when you were 8 years old and you accidentally broke my grandmother's vase? The one that had been in my family for 3 generations? "Yeah," he said, his voice puzzled by the change of subject. "You were so upset. You cried for hours. You were convinced I was going to stop loving you because you'd broken something I treasured." "I remember." "And what did I tell you?" A long pause. "You said that people are more important than things. That accidents happen, and what mattered was that you still loved me." "That's right." "But David, what you did to me wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A series of choices. And the consequences are more serious than a broken vase." I could hear him crying on the other end of the line. "But here's what I need you to understand," I continued. "People are still more important than things. Even more important than money. What you did was wrong, unforgivable wrong. But you're still my son. You're still Emma's father. You're still a person who can choose to be better." "How?" he whispered. "By living with what you did, not running from it. By making sure Emma grows up knowing that her father made a terrible mistake and spent the rest of his life making sure he never made another one like it. Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I considered the question carefully. 3 weeks ago, the answer would have been an immediate no. Even a week ago, I wouldn't have been sure. But listening to Christina's honesty, hearing David's genuine anguish, seeing them both struggle to become better people. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'm willing to find out." That night, for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I didn't have trouble falling asleep. Because for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were all going to be okay. The money was still sitting in my account, untouched. David and Christina were still living in their small rental apartment, working regular jobs, going to therapy twice a week. Emma was still having Sunday dinners with me, still helping me mash potatoes and telling me about school. But something had shifted. Something fundamental about how we all saw each other and ourselves. Trust is like a bridge that's been burned down. You can rebuild it, but it takes time, and it's never quite the same as the original. Sometimes, though, the new bridge is stronger than the old one. Sometimes, it's built on a foundation of honesty and hard-won wisdom instead of assumptions and unspoken expectations. I was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, our new bridge might be worth building. But there was still one more test coming. One more moment that would determine whether we were really a family again, or just people going through the motions of forgiveness. And it was going to come sooner than any of us expected. 6 weeks after David and Christina's return, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was a Thursday morning in October, and I was sitting at my kitchen table paying bills when the phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer it anyway. Mrs. Patterson? The voice was professional, female, slightly strained. This is Dr. Rebecca Santos from University of Iowa Hospitals. I'm calling about your granddaughter, Emma Patterson. The world stopped spinning. What about Emma? I managed to say. She's been in an accident. She's stable, but she's injured, and she's asking for you. Her parents are on their way, but they asked me to call you as well. I don't remember hanging up the phone. I don't remember getting dressed or grabbing my purse or driving to Iowa City. The next thing I clearly recall is running through the hospital corridors in my house slippers, following signs to the pediatric emergency department. David and Christina were already there, huddled together in the waiting room, both of them looking like they'd aged 10 years in the past hour. When David saw me, he stood up, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Then, without thinking, I opened my arms, and my son collapsed into them, sobbing like the little boy he used to be. What happened? I asked, holding him while Christina filled me in. School bus accident, she said, her voice shaky but controlled. The bus skidded on wet leaves and hit a tree. Most of the kids just got shaken up, but Emma was sitting near the impact point. She has a concussion and a broken arm, and they're worried about internal injuries. Where is she? They're running tests. CT scans, X-rays. The doctor said it could be another hour before we know anything. I looked around the sterile waiting room with its uncomfortable plastic chairs and harsh fluorescent lighting. This was every parent's nightmare, every grandparent's worst fear. And in that moment, all the anger I'd been carrying, all the hurt and betrayal and carefully maintained distance, just evaporated. Have you eaten anything? I asked them. They both shook their heads. I'm going to get us some coffee and sandwiches from the cafeteria. You both look like you're about to collapse. When I came back with food and drinks, I found David pacing the waiting room like a caged animal, while Christina sat motionless in her chair, staring at nothing. Sit, I told David. Eat something. I can't, he said. What if she's seriously hurt? What if she has brain damage? What if? David. My voice cut through his panic like a knife. Stop. You can't help Emma by falling apart. He looked at me with desperate eyes. Mom, I can't lose her. She's everything good about my life. She's the one pure thing I haven't screwed up. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Emma's accident. This was about David's guilt manifesting as terror. He was so convinced that he was a fundamentally bad person now that he was afraid the universe was going to punish him by taking away what he loved most. You're not going to lose her, I said firmly. And you're not a fundamentally bad person, David. You made bad choices, but that doesn't make you bad. How can you say that after what I did to you? I looked at my son, really looked at him. In 6 weeks, he'd lost weight, gained gray hair, and developed lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. The careless confidence he'd worn like armor was completely gone, replaced by something humbler and more genuine. Because, I said, in the past 6 weeks, I've watched you try to make things right. I've watched you work 2 jobs to pay for that apartment instead of demanding access to lottery money you have no legal right to. I've watched you go to therapy twice a week and come home looking like you've been put through a blender because you're actually doing the work of figuring out how to be better. Christina looked up at me with surprise. I've been paying attention, I told them both. You think I've been sitting in my house nursing grudges and counting my money? I've been watching you. Both of you. What did you see? Christina asked quietly. I saw David spending his lunch breaks at Emma's school, volunteering to help with her class's reading program because he realized how many precious moments with her he'd almost thrown away. I saw you, Christina, working double shifts at the diner and coming home exhausted but never taking that exhaustion out on Emma. They were both staring at me now. I saw you both learning to live within your means, learning to value what you actually have instead of obsessing about what you think you deserve. I saw you becoming the kind of parents Emma deserves. Mrs. Patterson? We all turned to see Dr. Santos approaching. She was a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the sort of calm competence that immediately made me trust her. How is she? David asked, jumping to his feet. She's going to be fine, Dr. Santos said, and I felt the tension leave the room like air leaving a punctured balloon. The concussion is mild, the broken arm is clean and will heal perfectly, and there's no sign of internal injuries. She's awake, alert, and asking for ice cream. Christina started crying with relief. David sat down heavily, like his legs wouldn't support him anymore. Can we see her? I asked. Of course. But fair warning, she's pretty excited about the cast. She's already planning what she wants people to draw on it. Emma's hospital room was small but cheerful, with cartoon characters painted on the walls and a window that looked out onto the hospital's children's garden. She was sitting up in bed, her left arm in a bright purple cast, grinning like she'd just won a prize. Grandma Margaret, she called when she saw me. Look. I got a purple cast. Purple is my favorite color. I walked over to her bed, trying not to cry at how small she looked surrounded by all the medical equipment. It's a very nice cast, I agreed. How are you feeling, sweetheart? My head hurts a little, and my arm feels weird, but the doctor said I get to miss school for 3 days. And look what I got. She held up a small stuffed elephant that one of the nurses had given her. His name is Peanut, and he's going to help me get better. The nurse said Peanut has healing powers. I looked at this remarkable child, my granddaughter, who could find joy in a hospital room and healing powers in a stuffed elephant, and I made a decision that had been building in my heart for weeks. Emma, I said, when you get out of here, how would you like to go on a special trip with Grandma Margaret? Her eyes lit up. Where? Anywhere you want. Disney World, maybe? Or we could go see the ocean. You've never seen the ocean. Really? Just me and you? Well, I said, looking at David and Christina, maybe Mommy and Daddy could come too, if they want to. David's eyes filled with tears. Mom, we can't afford. I can, I said simply. And I want to. Emma deserves a celebration trip for being so brave, and you two deserve a family vacation for working so hard to put your lives back together. But the money is mine to spend however I choose, I said firmly. And I choose to spend some of it on making memories with my family. The word family hung in the air between us, loaded with significance. It was the first time since this whole nightmare began that I'd called them my family without reservation, without conditions, without holding part of myself back. Christina stood up and walked over to me. Margaret, she said, are you sure? I looked around the room at the 3 people I loved most in the world. Emma, chattering excitedly about castles and princesses and whether Peanut the elephant could come to Disney World too. David, crying quietly as he realized that I was offering him forgiveness in the form of a family vacation. Christina, looking at me with something that had taken me weeks to recognize as genuine respect. I'm sure, I said. We're family. That's what family does. But even as I said it, I knew there was still one more conversation we needed to have. One more decision that would determine what our future looked like. Because $52 million is a lot of money. It's enough to change lives, to secure futures, to make dreams come true. But it's also enough to destroy families if it's not handled carefully. And I was about to find out if we were ready to handle it together, or if money would always stand between us like a wall we couldn't tear down. That conversation would happen in 3 days, when Emma was released from the hospital and we were all back in my living room, the same room where this whole story began. But for now, I was content to sit by my granddaughter's hospital bed, listening to her plan our Disney World trip and watching my son and daughter-in-law slowly realize that sometimes, love really can conquer all. Even betrayal. Even fraud. Even the kind of deep, soul-crushing hurt that makes you wonder if families can survive their own worst impulses. Sometimes, if you're very lucky and willing to do the hard work of forgiveness, love wins. But the real test was still coming. 3 days later, we were all back in my living room. Emma was on the sofa with her purple cast propped up on pillows, showing Peanut the elephant all the family photos on my mantelpiece and explaining who everyone was. David and Christina sat in the same chairs they'd occupied during our confrontation 7 weeks earlier, but everything about the atmosphere was different. This time, we were here as a family. I had made coffee and set out the good china again, but not because I was trying to intimidate anyone. This time, it was because we were celebrating Emma's recovery, yes, but more than that. We were celebrating the fact that we'd survived the worst thing that had ever happened to our family, and we'd come out stronger on the other side. Before we start planning our Disney World trip, I said, settling into my chair with my coffee cup, there's something we need to discuss. Something important. Emma looked up from her conversation with Peanut. Are you talking about grown-up stuff again? I am, sweetheart. But this grown-up stuff involves you too. She perked up with interest. I looked at David and Christina, then back at Emma. Emma, do you know what the lottery is? It's when people win money, right? Like on TV? That's right. Well, it turns out that Grandma Margaret won the lottery. A lot of money. Emma's eyes went wide. How much money? $52 million. She stared at me for a moment, trying to process a number that big. Is that more than $100? I laughed. Much, much more than $100. Wow, she said solemnly. That's probably more money than anyone needs. Out of the mouths of babes. You're right, I said. It is more money than any one person needs. Which is why I've been thinking about what to do with it. David and Christina were both watching me carefully, not daring to speak. First, I said, I'm setting aside money for Emma's future. College, graduate school if she wants it, maybe a house someday when she's grown up. Enough so that she never has to worry about having opportunities. Emma beamed. Can I use some of it to build a really big animal hospital for all the animals that nobody wants? Absolutely, I said, my heart swelling with pride for this remarkable child. That sounds like exactly the right thing to spend money on. I turned to David and Christina. Second, I'm setting aside money for you too. Not as much as you would have had if you'd successfully stolen it all from me, I said with a slight smile, but enough to buy a house, start Emma's college fund, maybe start the business you always talked about, David. David's eyes filled with tears. Mom, we don't deserve. Maybe you didn't 7 weeks ago, I interrupted. But you do now. You've earned it. Both of you. You've shown me that you can change, that you can put family before money, that you can choose to be better people. Christina spoke up, her voice shaking. How much are you talking about? $2 million, I said. Enough to be comfortable, to provide for Emma, to never have to worry about money again. But not enough to make you forget who you are or where you came from. They both stared at me in shock. But there are conditions, I continued. Non-negotiable conditions. What conditions? David asked. First, you use the money wisely. House, education, reasonable investments. No mansions, no sports cars, no showing off. You live like the good people I raised you to be. They both nodded eagerly. Second, you stay in Iowa. Emma grows up near her grandmother. We remain a family, a real family, not people who send Christmas cards once a year. Of course, Christina said. We never want to leave again. Third, you continue with the therapy. Both individually and as a family. What happened to us can never happen again, and the only way to ensure that is to keep doing the work. Agreed, David said. And fourth, I said, looking directly at Emma, you teach Emma the value of money, but more importantly, the value of family. You make sure she grows up knowing that people are more important than things, and that kindness is worth more than any amount in a bank account. We will, Christina promised. Emma, who had been listening to this adult conversation with the serious attention that only 10-year-olds can muster, raised her good hand. Yes, sweetheart. I said. Grandma Margaret, what are you going to do with the rest of the money? I smiled at her. I'm going to give most of it away. To charities, to people who need help, to organizations that take care of animals like the ones you want to help someday. All of it? David asked, surprised. Not all of it. I'm keeping enough to make sure I can take care of myself, travel if I want to, spoil my granddaughter occasionally. I winked at Emma. But most of it, yes. $50 million is more than any one person needs, and there are a lot of people in the world who could use help. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a folder I'd prepared. I've already spoken to James Mitchell about setting up the necessary trusts and foundations. Emma's Education Fund, your family trust, my charitable foundation. It's all being arranged. David shook his head in amazement. Mom, I don't know what to say. Say that you'll never forget how close we came to losing each other, I said. Say that you'll never again let money become more important than family. I promise, David said, his voice thick with emotion. Mom, I promise. Christina stood up and walked over to me, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she hugged me. Really hugged me, like a daughter hugging her mother. Thank you, she whispered in my ear. Thank you for giving us another chance. Thank you for proving you deserved it, I whispered back. Emma, not wanting to be left out of the group hug, scrambled off the sofa with Peanut tucked under her good arm and wrapped herself around both of us. This is the best family meeting ever, she declared. Can we have pancakes to celebrate? We spent the rest of the afternoon in my kitchen, all of us working together to make Emma's celebration pancakes. David mixed the batter while Christina set the table with my good dishes. Emma, despite her caste, insisted on helping by adding chocolate chips to the pancakes in the shape of smiley faces. As I watched them work, my son, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete peace. Not the fragile peace of people walking on eggshells, but the deep, abiding peace of a family that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Grandma Margaret, Emma said as we sat around the table eating chocolate chip smiley face pancakes, can I ask you something? Anything, sweetheart. When Mommy and Daddy did that bad thing to you, were you very sad? I looked at David and Christina, both of whom had gone still, waiting for my answer. How do you explain to a 10-year-old the kind of heartbreak that comes from being betrayed by the people you love most? I was very sad, I said honestly. Sadder than I'd ever been in my life. But you're not sad anymore? I considered the question carefully. No, I'm not sad anymore. Do you know why? She shook her head, chocolate chip smeared on her chin. Because sometimes, when very sad things happen, they help us figure out what's really important. And they help the people we love figure out how to be better. Emma nodded solemnly. Like when I broke your special vase last year, and I felt really bad, but then I learned to be more careful. Exactly like that, I said. Sometimes we have to break things before we can learn how to take better care of them. After lunch, David and Christina took Emma home for her afternoon rest, doctor's orders, but they promised to come back for dinner. As I watched them drive away, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced since Robert was alive. That evening, we had our first real Sunday dinner in months. I made pot roast, David's favorite, and Christina actually complimented the seasoning instead of suggesting improvements. Emma told us all about her plans for her cast. She wanted every member of the family to sign it, and she wanted to ask her teacher if she could do a presentation about her accident for show and tell. After dinner, as we sat in the living room digesting our meal and watching Emma teach Peanut how to play checkers, David looked at me with an expression I remembered from his childhood. "Mom," he said, "there's something I need to say." "What's that?" "I need to say thank you. Not just for the money, though that's incredibly generous. Thank you for fighting back when we tried to destroy your life. Thank you for being strong enough to show us who we'd become. Thank you for loving us enough to give us a chance to be better." He paused, struggling with the words. "If you had just rolled over and let us ship you off to that nursing home, we would have spent the rest of our lives being the kind of people who abandon their family when it becomes convenient. We would have raised Emma to think that's normal, that's acceptable. You saved us from becoming people we couldn't live with." Christina nodded in agreement. "The last 7 weeks have been the hardest of my life," she said. "But they've also been the most important. I needed to face what I'd become. I needed to learn how to value what I actually have instead of always wanting more." I looked around my living room, the same room where they'd told me I wasn't wanted, the same room where I'd signed away what I thought were my rights to the lottery ticket, the same room where we'd had our confrontation and our reconciliation. "Do you want to know something funny?" I said. They both looked at me expectantly. "The day you came here to tell me about putting me in the nursing home, I was sitting in this exact chair thinking about how blessed I was. I had my health, I had my house, I had Sunday dinners with my family. I was grateful for what I had. And then we ruined it," David said quietly. "No," I said firmly. "You tested it. You tested all of us. And we passed." I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, picking up the same photograph I'd held during our confrontation, David's high school graduation, all of us smiling together. "Your father always said that you don't really know what someone is made of until you see how they handle their worst day," I said. "Well, we've all had our worst days now. And we've all seen what we're really made of." I looked at each of them in turn. Emma is made of resilience and joy and an unshakable belief in the goodness of people. Christina is made of courage and the willingness to face hard truths about herself. David is made of love and the strength to rebuild himself from the ground up. "What are you made of, Mom?" David asked. I smiled. "I'm made of the same thing your father was made of. The absolute, unshakable belief that family is worth fighting for, even when, especially when, that family is fighting against you." Later that night, after they'd gone home and I was alone in my house for the first time in weeks without feeling lonely, I called James Mitchell. "Margaret," he said when he answered. "How did it go?" "It went perfectly," I said. "They're ready. We're all ready. So you want me to proceed with the trust arrangements we discussed?" "Yes. $2 million for David and Christina's family, $5 million for Emma's education and future, and the rest distributed according to the charitable plan we outlined." "And you're certain about this? You're giving away over $40 million. I looked around my living room, at the family photos and handmade quilts and furniture that had witnessed 43 years of marriage and 34 years of raising a son and 10 years of being a grandmother. "James," I said, 3 months ago, I thought I was going to die alone in a nursing home, forgotten by the people I loved most. Tonight, I'm planning a Disney World vacation with my family and setting up college funds for my granddaughter. I have more than I ever dreamed possible. The money could ensure your security for the rest of your life." "The money already has," I interrupted. "Not because of how much I'm keeping, but because of how much I'm giving away. I'm securing my legacy, James. I'm making sure that when I'm gone, people will remember me not as the woman who hoarded $52 million, but as the woman who used it to make the world a little bit better. After I hung up the phone, I sat in Robert's chair and thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 months ago, I'd been a victim. 2 months ago, I'd been angry and hurt and bent on revenge. 6 weeks ago, I'd been suspicious and guarded, unsure whether my family could ever really change. Tonight, I was something I'd never been before. I was a woman who had faced the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged not broken, but stronger. Not bitter, but wiser. Not alone, but surrounded by people who had proven they would do whatever it took to earn their place in my heart. If you've made it this far in my story, I need you to do something for me. I need you to think about the people in your life who matter most to you. The ones you'd fight for, the ones you'd forgive, the ones who make your world worth living in. Hold on to them. Cherish them. And if they disappoint you, when they disappoint you, because everyone does eventually, remember that sometimes the people we love need to break before they can learn how to be whole. My son tried to steal my lottery winnings and abandon me in a nursing home. My daughter-in-law looked at me like I was disposable. They hurt me in ways I didn't think I could survive. But they also gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. They showed me exactly how strong I am, exactly how much love I'm capable of, and exactly what kind of woman I want to be in whatever years I have left. Tomorrow, we start planning our Disney World trip. Next month, David and Christina will close on their new house, a modest 4-bedroom home 3 miles from mine. In 6 months, Emma will start taking riding lessons, because apparently seeing the ocean made her want to learn to ride horses too. And in a year, when Emma's cast is long gone and her broken arm is just a memory, we'll probably look back on this whole nightmare as the best thing that ever happened to our family. Not because it was easy, but because it was hard. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the healing brought us closer together than we'd ever been before. My name is Margaret Ann Patterson. I'm 72 years old. I won $52 million in the lottery, and I gave most of it away. And I've never been richer in my life. If my story touched you, if it made you think about your own family or your own capacity for forgiveness, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the most important lesson I learned through all of this is that we're all capable of more love, more strength, and more grace than we ever imagined. Even when, especially when, we're tested by the people who matter most. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember, you're stronger than you think you are, more loved than you know, and more capable of forgiveness than you ever imagined. Trust me on that. I'm living proof.